Today we will be closing the day, but before that we will have some inspiring speeches that will come just to open the day, so that we can start with inspiration to close the school. So we will start with a session that will talk about the future of the digital transformation from an academic and institutional point of view. So the first speaker is my director, Emanuele Baldacci. He's the director of Director ED, which is Digital Services at Director General of Informatics. So welcome, Emanuele. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Natalia, for the introduction. My role is like, this morning for you is like, I don't know if you go to music concerts, but typically there is the most important group that comes next, and then I'm the one who needs to warm you up. So I'm preceding the important person and trying to give you a little bit of the internal kitchen point of view from the institutional viewpoint, particularly from the European Commission. How do we see the digital transformation and what are the key components? I would focus in particular on how our organization, as let's say an example of a public administration, is looking at the transformation and how we have put in place what we call the digital strategy and what are the key components and levers that we think are important to implement it. By the way, we developed this digital strategy before the new commission was in place. You know that we had a change at the top of our organization with a new commission that just started. And then our new president, in fact, put a bit more of fuel in the engine of this digital transformation, and a bit is, let's say, an understatement, because she made the digitalization a key political priority for the Commission, so helping Europe get more digital, gain digital sovereignty. And then she added, and the Commission should lead by example. So we are now put in the front line, if you want, to really walk the talk and try to show to the rest of Europe and help the rest of Europe also move forward that digital transformation is not just something that you, let's say, can build nice slides with, but you can also change in practice the way governments interact with citizens. And I think that in the past few days, you have seen examples of what this means in practice and what are the challenges. And so we are tackling this in two ways. First, and this is why you see a double transformation agenda. First, we want to modernize our machinery because we are a public administration. We work, let's say, with outdated technologies inside the house, and we provide services to, let's say, the rest of the business and citizens in Europe, which are also in part, let's say, outdated and definitely not up to the expectations that people have. And the expectations that people have is not so much, let's say, inspired by what the government does, but it's inspired by what the private sector does. So what we have in mind as a consumer experience is experiences that we have with platforms, for example, or with, let's say, the seamless way of purchasing items on Amazon. This is the mindset, I think, with which every citizen comes to the government's door and knocks on the government doors, and then the disappointment and the frustration is that you need to fill forms. And I guess that this is something to keep in mind. So we need to modernize our internal organization, and in that sense we are not any different from any other public administration in Europe. But then we have a second role, and this is what we are doing with our interoperability program HAT, that we are also helping create in Europe the conditions for public administrations to have the toolings, the standards, the technologies, so that in Europe we can help develop cross-border digital public services. And the cross-border nature is a very important thing because you can build very effective public administration digital services in 27 countries in Europe, but let's say if citizens are moving around, if businesses moving around, they cannot access these services as if they were in their own country. And that's a big violation of a fundamental right that we all recognize, the right to movement within Europe. So cross-border nature, meaning accessing your services in a digital way from everywhere, everyhow, with every channel, that's considered, let's say, a must. And that's why we are looking into something that we call the government interoperability mechanism, which is a set of enablers that should help move in that direction. So let me go quickly through the digital transformation in the Commission. The logic is that we want to be modern, and I think you have seen this already in some of the other presentations. I'm not telling you anything that is particularly different. So the first item that you see there is data-driven. Organizations are not using their data assets well enough because they are confining the data into silos. They are not allowing the data to be interconnected, and they are losing a lot of information that could be helpful to do two things. First of all, understand and, let's say, make the processes, the internal procedures, smarter, so because they can be using the data to adapt them to the final users of the procedure. Secondly, creating services that are, again, smarter because they can make better use of technologies. And the Commission, as a political organization, as any other government, we also have, let's say, policy responsibilities. So how can you be effective in designing and implementing and monitoring the execution of policies if you're not using the power of data, if you're not becoming a data-driven organization where at any step in the process you are measuring, assessing, and providing evidence for why decisions are taken. That's a cultural change, and the technology enabler here is to build a data capability that allows you to use the data that you have in the house better, integrate them, make sense of them through technologies, and also be able to harness data which are outside the government ecosystem, because we know that in these days, and particularly towards the futures, with Internet of Things and availability of new data sources, we will need to be able to interact with this broader data ecosystem. It's not just about integrating public registries, but it's about getting information which is out there, for example, on the Internet, and trying to integrate it with our internal data and use this information for insight. It should be user-centric, as you have heard many times, so the customer is driving, and we need to provide services that are customer-oriented. And maybe an interesting aspect is that we are building this, the technology infrastructure to deliver the transformation on the basis of reusable component. Why it is important? Because it's a key tenet of interoperability. If you have your technology designed in a modular way that is plug and play, it's technology agnostic, it means that once you are building something for a particular domain, let's say social protection, you are reusing the same capability once you are building another application in a completely different setup, for example, for health policy. And then if you move this broader to the European context, again, if your components are really reusable and shareable, it means that what is invested, let's say if Germany makes an investment in a certain capability for the secure exchange of messages, that can be reused in Italy, and so on. So the concept is that we need to move to a different architecture based on reusability and sharing as key principles. And then cybersecurity, because security and trust, it's overwhelming as a task. It's a need to make sure that citizens are entrusting public administration to use their data in a way that they also exercise the control. And it's vital for, let's say, the interest of any government administration to ensure that the information that we are treating is not misused for various purposes. And how do we achieve this very ambitious high-level agenda? Well, we have an integrated approach, which I think most governments at this point have, so a digital strategy or whatever other document that describes your vision, your strategic goals, and your actions, and monitors the implementation of these actions. It's important. You need a governance, and the Commission, for example, is a decentralized administration where there are IT responsibilities in different departments. This is very similar to some countries in Europe. What did we do? We didn't go for a very centralized governance. We didn't want the IT department to be the only deciders. No, we went for a co-creation mindset in the house. So what we wanted is to have the different stakeholders be at the table and decide together under the direction of the Chief Operating Officer, who is also the head of IT, if you want, the Chief Information Officer in the organization. We created an IT board that is responsible for setting the policies, describing the architectures, and agreeing on the allocation of the budget and on the implementation of the key, or the approval, if you want, of the key IT transformation projects. So without having to centralize everything. You set up a collaborative governance in place that allows you, however, to be in control of a decentralized IT implementation environment. And then finally, but this is not the least important aspect, you need to change also your skills and capabilities. I will come back to this in a minute, and that's how we plan to implement the strategy in big blocks. Let me guide you through this very quickly, starting from the bottom as in a typical IT description. The first layer is the infrastructure. We know that we need to be moving to hybrid cloud environments, because most of the applications are going to be delivered by the market in a software as a service type of mode. So this is not purely, however, about purchasing cloud solutions, because they are there, they are available, it's extremely easy, but you need to make sure that your on-premise data center replicates the same functionalities and pricing model, organizational model as a cloud vendor, and that you're integrating the on-prem, so to say, the on-premise data infrastructure and the off-premise cloud infrastructure, so that you can exchange in a secure way information depending on the data classification between these two different environments. There are data that will go to the cloud, that are already going to the cloud in our case, and there are data that will remain for a variety of reasons because of their sensitivity, for example, in the on-prem environment. And you want these two environments to be seamlessly connected, and you want this also to be not purely a change in the way you handle the infrastructure. You want to be this also an enabler for a different way of building applications. In today's world, applications are monolithic and end-to-end. So you start with the data, and then you build the whole application, let's say, in one single place. Now, with cloud enablement and software as a service as a capability, the role of applications will be much more a role of orchestration of different toolings that are taken from different places, as opposed to a very monolithic code that you write hand-to-hand and it's stored in one single specific area. So this also requires better governance, better security, and a different way of developing code in the house. The second layer is the data ecosystem. I mentioned that already. This is now emphasized as a standalone capability. It's about everything that has to do with data, collecting the data, storing the data, managing the data, integrating the data through metadata management systems, the most important aspect, I would say. And then it's about consuming the data through analytics and making the data available through dissemination and reporting, be it an open data portal or a reporting system that fits into the internal decision-making process, a visualization dashboard for the management, whatever you may think it. Why is metadata management-based data integration the key? Because as long as the data are sitting in different areas and are not able to talk to each other, we will not be harnessing the real power. If we collect data in health and we cannot connect them with data on social protection and social assistance, we may not be inferring what are the behaviors of some of the beneficiaries of social assistance, for example, which have an implication for healthcare policy design, just to make one very simplistic example. And you can come up with many more of these examples in terms of the policy areas. But also when you are delivering services, if you think about the concept of making life easier for customers and not asking users or clients or citizens or businesses to provide the same information twice to the government, well, what you need is a data integration capability. You want someone coming to your portal and requesting, for example, let's say a new citizens in a country, and the citizens providing the information to this one-stop portal just in one single entry, and then the different departments of the government being able to pull the information out of this single pipeline, if you want, to, let's say, address different challenges. That's not what is the case today. You need to go to the tax administration portal, and then you need to go to the immigration portal, and then you need to remember that you also need a health insurance, so you need to go to another place. So you see, the change is completely different. You want the citizens to basically just enter and provide the relevant information, and the government to deal with this information internally in the back end in a seamless way, so in a way that is not visible. And then the next layer is the reusable solution platform. You can think of these as Lego blocks. You remember the Lego with which you used to play, I guess, at least in my age, I used to, in my good old days. Well, these Lego blocks are, let's say, they can be seamlessly integrated. They are very basic, they do very simple things, and then you add one on top of the other, and you can build a house, a car, or a castle, whatever you want to build with it. So the Lego blocks can be translated into reusable solutions for authentication, for access management, for trust services, for secure exchange of data, for data capabilities, all the type of things that are the basic services that are needed. And then the government service platform will be built on the basis of adding one layer on the other and using the bricks to build the castle, so to say. And then on top of this, you need to take into account that, let's say, although you standardize and you try to, let's say, use reusable solutions across the board, there will always be something that is specific, specific for an application that has to be applied in a particular domain, for example. So that's what we call the digital solutions, which are really like the tailored part that comes on top of these generic layers, infrastructure, data, reusable building blocks, that will be, let's say, the customized part, if you want, that you will need to add on top of this to realize applications. And finally, you need to give digital workplace tools, so smarter tools for people to work, again, in a modern way. So, for example, we want our colleagues to be able to work from this place as if they were in the office. And that's, let's say, what we are enabling. Now we are already, let's say, a long way into that. You can basically work everywhere. But still, let's say, the tooling needs to be expanded to be able to, for example, have a video, let's say, a high-quality video conference with your colleagues while you're sitting in the car between Luxembourg and Brussels. And that's not just a theoretical example. It's exactly, let's say, my use need, for example, and other similar type of issues. So that's for the internal organization of the Commission. But as I said, we also have a role in Europe to promote interoperability, in particular, as a key ingredient in creating an interconnected set of public administrations. And in the next 5 minutes, I'll guide you very quickly through these issues. In particular, I don't know whether you heard already about the once-only principle. In the Tallinn Declaration a couple of years ago, the ministries responsible for public administration reform subscribed to a set of principles that should guide the reform of public administration in a digital sense. And among those principles, it was featuring very highly the concept of interoperability. So what we build in one country should be reusable and shareable with other countries. The cross-border capabilities should be enabled. But also the concept of once only, which is what I mentioned before. You should not expect or you should not force citizens and businesses to submit twice the same information to governments. And governments means government in a country, but in principle it should be governments all over Europe. Because if I'm, as I am, a citizen of Italy living in Luxembourg, and the Italian government has documents about me that are needed by the Luxembourgish administration to, for example, provide me a driver's license, I should not drive or fly all the way to Rome, get the document and bring it to the administration in Luxembourg, because there are technical capabilities and technologies available that would allow us in a secure way to exchange these documents administration by administration and allow me to just make with a click a request in the country where I'm currently resident and get access with my consensus to the information that I'm needed. Well, that's the once only principle applied to a very specific case. It's a very powerful notion, simple but powerful. Powerful because it doesn't exist now. It's not our experience as citizens. And very strong because it will demand in the next few years adjustments in the way the government digital service platforms are designed and the technology that sits behind that. So what is this once only principle, let's say, going to imply in terms of the interoperability? That we will need to build the technologies, the governance, and the organizational setup so that governments will be able to exchange with other governments, so public administration to public administration, in secure ways and in a trusted way, meaning with the full consensus mechanism by the individual, the citizens, for example, or the business, information that is relevant for accessing public services. Now, in the example I was giving about the driver's license, things are relatively straightforward, but start thinking about health, for example, where there are third parties. So I would like my personal doctor in Luxembourg to talk to my previous personal doctor in Italy, who would like to have access to hospital records which are sitting in the country, so that I can be better treated if I fall ill in Luxembourg. Now, there are many more actors in this game, and still you want the whole process to be, again, secure, based on the once-only principle, based on a full consensus and traceability mechanism, because obviously I don't want the wrong information to go in the wrong hands. I would not trust the system unless I had been, let's say, explained very clearly that there is a technical infrastructure behind this exchange that would allow, let's say, this mechanism to happen in the right way and not providing data in the wrong hands. So that's in a very high-level nutshell what this government interoperability idea is about. Obviously, it takes much more than technologies, and this is my last comment. We talked a lot, I talked a lot about the technology enablers. I talked a little bit about governance, because these things are important. But it is increasingly more important to have the right capabilities in the ecosystem. Now, what do I mean by ecosystem? We are all, most of us at least, are government employees. When we think about upskilling and getting the right capabilities in the house, we think about government. We think about our people, our colleagues, ourselves being able to keep track and keep in pace with technologies. At the same time, increasingly, modern public administrations are relying on the private sector to do work together in a co-creation partnership mode. And this is sometimes summarized with a nice word, GovTech, which basically means that the government should not just tap the private sector with the traditional procurement mechanism, I go and buy, but should also encourage the private sector to come up with solutions that are fit for purpose for government. And this, for example, means becoming more transparent about what the government wants, but also what the government does. So what are the data, the metadata, the systems that the government is using, and how can we build interoperability into this game so that the private sector can come with an application or a solution that can solve a problem that the government alone cannot. So that's why you will see GovTech popping up in most of the European strategies and the implementations of these strategies. And let's say the game for the transformation of government becomes increasingly a cooperative game where you're involving the private sector and you're involving, as I know you have been told yesterday, also the citizens in an engagement about what do they need, what type of services are needed to respond to their needs. Okay, I think I exhausted my time, so I will now give the floor back to Natalia for the top star of the morning after my hopefully warm enough warm-up.
Thank you very much, Emanuele. And now I have the honor to welcome Professor Bouckaert, I try to pronounce it, who is full professor of public management at the KU Leuven Public Governance Institute, and he is past president of the International Institute of Administration Science. I won't go to the whole bio because then we have to spend the whole morning, so I will just give the floor so you can. Thank you very much.
So good morning from my side, and I'm very honored and pleased that we have this top meeting here in Leuven, and to continue the metaphor of Dr. Baldacci, is to say, you know, if we stay in the music scenery, I think it's like an opera of Verdi. You first have a big setting the scene, you know, of who are the actors, what are they doing, and already announcing some of the conflicts. Then the second part is the drama. I will bring some drama there. But there is a final stage of the opera, as always, to say, it depends a bit, you know, we are Europeans, so it's not Hollywood. It's not a completely happy end, but there is a future there, and especially in the Verdi operas, I think, to stay in the Italian sphere, to say, you know, we will march out of this room, I will tell you, waving with the flags of interoperability to save the world, because there is hope in this world. I will bring you some drama and then some hope. So based on the scenery, going back to the scenery, of course, which is so marvelously said by my colleague. I have 6 points, but let me first ask, of course, who is against interoperability? Of course, none of you. None of you. Well, I mean, we are preaching in the church full of believers. Then the question is outside there. Who is against interoperability? I mean, if you explain it well, people will say, well, that makes sense. So the question then is, why is it not happen as we have it in our head? That's the question. And we have to, it's not a matter of convincing, it's not a matter of belief. Belief is not the methodology. Right? We have to have substance, evidence-based things. We have to touch reality. And I will give you 6 issues. You know, when I'm teaching reform, because I'm specialized in public sector reform within the OECD countries, I always start my teaching with a song of Lynn Anderson. I mean, I'm not singing myself, of course not. I mean, I'm not in the opera, Italian opera. Lynn Anderson, I don't know if you know the country, she died, I think, 2 years ago. I never promised you a rose garden. I don't know if you can find it on YouTube, you know. I won't sing it now. I don't want to embarrass myself. But I think you need to look at it. I never promised you a rose garden. But I will give you at the end, as I said, after the drama, some of the rose garden. We are walking to the rose garden, in a way, to say that. I have 6 reasons why the obvious is not happening. And of course, for a perfect speech, I should have 7, because 7 is a sacred number. So my next speech will have 7. So it's like in the Hollywood movies, you have to come back, you know. So 6 reasons, and I will go through these reasons in a logical way, I hope. I won't enumerate it, but at least now this is expectations management, so you see what will come next. So the first thing is, why are we giving the right answers to the wrong questions? I think that's one of the issues. We see a kind of supply and demand of knowledge on digital transformation. And I can say you, this is not just about change, this is about transformation. You have to manage change, but you have to govern transformation. That's a huge difference. It's the difference between management and governance. It's a huge difference between these two. But one of the things is, you know, on this digital transformation, we see a supply and demand element here. And there are zones of mismatch and frustration. Of course, the worst thing that can happen is there is, on issues we want to solve, there is no supply and there is no demand. And suddenly, a rock falls on our head. We didn't see it come. That's the first ignorance. And we have to get rid of that box there. But there are 2 zones of frustration. It means there is a supply, but there is no demand. And people say, but I have this excellent supply. Why don't people see how excellent it is, what we are doing? The second zone is, of course, there is demand and there is no supply. There's no research, there is no evidence, and so there are 2 zones, and we have to focus on these degrees of matching satisfaction, which is actually trying to move and create a dynamics of improvement. Improvement means actually trying to have a better match, understanding supply and demand, and trying to match it in the ideas of digital in this technical sense, but even more in the governance sense. And we have to increase these. How could we do that? Well, it's of course, right answers to wrong questions. It means perhaps that we have too much of a supply-driven approach to demand. The suppliers are actually dominating the demand. And the suppliers say, we know what we're talking about. You don't know it, of course, but we will teach you. We will convince you to say, this is what you need to do. That's perhaps, and the frustration zones, we have to solve that. And to do that, we have to shift our mindsets and our strategies to have a demand-driven approach to supply. We have to reverse this here. And I think that's a very crucial one. We have to have strategies to reduce the frustration zones, and do it very actively. So we have to map what we know on the supply and the demand side and make sure it's... And we have to have strategies to increase the matching satisfaction. That's the first point. The second point, why the obvious is not obvious, has to do with the cost-benefit analysis thinking. I think that's also an important element here. I mean, the concern of the money is, of course, there, the concerns of the benefits and making it visible. You should know that the concept of performance, we have to have a performance digital system and a performing, of course, digital transformation to a better performing system. The word performance in English and in French has a double meaning again. Performance on the one hand, it's Verdi, it's opera, it's a good performance, right? So it's putting something on stage is a performance. But performance is also results. We have to have tangible results which we can demonstrate. And we have to make sure we have better results, we can better present, and better put in perspective. So we have to have a better performance of a better performance. And that's actually not just poetry or rhetorics, it's actually very substantial. Perception becomes important because perception will affect trust systems here too. So the digital cost-benefit analysis, well, of course, we can list the costs, can't we? It's experimenting, creating, transferring, collecting, processing, storing, making available. There are benefits, yes, but it's a bit like paradise is perhaps after that, when we are dead. Then we will be in paradise. No, that's too late. That's too late. We have to bring paradise earlier. And I think it's important to say, what are the benefits? We can compare, we have seen the listed already in the previous presentation. We have improved decision-making, we have better allocation of resources, we have transparency, we have other ways of responsibility and accountability of processing services, we have learning. So there are a whole list of benefits which we can. But what we see is actually, and the costs, that there is a kind of friction and tension between the cost, the listing of the costs and the listing of the benefits here. Time. Costs are immediate. Well, immediate, I mean, you have to pay them at, benefits are perhaps more on longer terms. Tangibility. Costs are very tangible. It's the euros. And it's very direct, it's unconditional. The benefits are not so tangible. They are indirect, sometimes they are conditional. The measurability, of course, it's easy to measure cost. But the benefits, how do you measure the benefits here? It's more difficult, better decisions, better allocation, efficiency gains, more effectiveness. It's a more complex production function on that side. The locus, the costs are bared by one organization, ultimately. The benefits can be more societal. And so what we see is a kind of, I call it natural deficit. It's a kind of systemic deficit between cost and benefits. And we have to be serious about that. So there is a kind of story there where the system systemically and systematically oversizes the cost side and the benefits are less visible, or the benefits are for someone else in the future, somewhere. Hopefully we're still alive. That kind of... And so what we have to do here is, of course, we need to control cost. That's clear. I mean, you couldn't expect me to say something else. But we have to transform to say this is actually not cost, it's investments. We have to say it's not cost, it's investment. And the second thing is we have to push and organize the perception of the benefits, the performance. We have to push the performance, and we have to push the perception of performance, which is actually the double meaning of performance, putting something on stage and have this visibility clear there. The third reason why the obvious is not obvious is normally we think from a problem to a solution. And I suggest we have to reverse that. We actually, of course, we always think from problem. It's a kind of causal thinking. We are brainwashed in this way, aren't we all? But perhaps we have to reverse this logic to say, let's reverse this and say, what problems are caused by solutions? And if we have a solution, what new problems are we going to cause? It's an interesting, let's say, Copernican twist in our mind to say, let's be creative. Because if there is resistance, it's because of uncertainty. People say, well, it will cause other problems. And so we are safe with the current situation. But so we have to anticipate that. We have to think from solutions to problems. Why is it that solutions create problems? Okay. There are three reasons. Well, first of all, I think it's an obvious one. We have the wrong solutions for the right problems. You know, it's very embarrassing when I have to say at an examination to a student, this answer was perfect. Unfortunately, it's to the wrong question, right? And I think that's part of the issue of what problems are we trying to solve. I think that's an important listing. You have to convince people. You have to have ownership, a shared ownership of the analysis of a problem to say, and the way to solve it and to anticipate that. The second is, yes, we had the right solution, but it was badly implemented. And the third reason is, yes, we had the right solution. Yes, it was correctly implemented. You know, it could be badly implemented, too late, wrong target groups, wrong subsidies, you know, all of that together. It's the policy failure implementation. But the solutions have disconnected themselves from the problems. That's also something that happens. Suddenly, you know, a solution is disconnected from the problem that it needed to solve. And let me give you an example. This is perhaps... Is it still readable for the backbenchers? Yes. So this is a reform zigzag, because transformation is not one problem, one solution, and a one-to-one relationship between the problem and the solution. That's not how it works. Transformation is about zigzag. I don't ski, I can't ski anymore, but it's you know, that's how you ski, right? And so reform is like, not downhill, of course, we ski uphill here. So that's a bit of a problem too, you know, we have to ski uphill. But if we want it, if we believe it, we probably can do it. So let me go through this, quickly through this zigzag here of reform, public sector reform in OECD countries. And I think ultimately digital transformation is also about that. And so if you compare the OECD countries in their zigzag reform agenda, what do you see? We start here at a perceived lack of performance, a perceived, I say perceived, but I won't explain all these details now, responsibility, accountability, transparency, control. I think all these keywords apply to this agenda here. And then someone comes with a solution, in this case here. I mean, New Zealand was one of the first to do that. Happily, New Zealand is just on the other side of the world, so there's a safe distance from New Zealand here from that point of view. Even for the Australians, you can't swim to New Zealand, there are too many sharks. But so the solution was create agencies, more autonomy. I saw the word distributed responsibility, we give autonomy. We have more specialization, we create capacity, of course we measure, and we say we have the solution, now we can go to the party. My God, that was a mistake, because these solutions created problems, new problems, and the problems were dysfunctional autonomy, the centrifuge, so it was a kind of, for those that are physics or science, entropy, it's organizational entropy. So the center loses control over the periphery. We focus on outputs, not on outcomes. You know, you just deliver services, but you don't look at the effects of it. Transaction costs and so on, gaming. All the things you don't want suddenly emerge. No, that's not what we wanted. And so we have to find new solutions. One of the big things is coordination, of course. How do we get this all together? And we heard the key terms were not mentioned, but they were implicitly in your speech to say hierarchies, markets, and networks. These are the three major types of, not just to govern systems, but also to coordinate. They have a coordinating capacity. And so for digital transformation, the question is, do we need more hierarchy? Do we need more market? Do we need more networks? Who is against networks? Nobody's against networks. So if we all agree, then it means we all have different definitions. Let's make it clear to say. But it's not about or. It's about and we have to combine it. And the question is, what is the right mix of hierarchies, markets, networks? Hierarchies, it's about legal frameworks. You know, it's a neo-institutionalist approach. There are theories behind. This is all evidence-based research. So it's about legal frameworks, you know, European legislation, national legislation, and all of that cascading down. It's about market mechanisms. It's about shared values and trust in networks, and to bring that all together. And so we have these new coordination mechanisms. And now we can go to the party. No, new problems emerge. Because sometimes hierarchies are pure re-centralization. Sometimes markets, you know, are moving from a public monopoly to a private monopoly is probably not the solution. Networks, symbolic, nice to have. Let's have a coffee, right? And we have audit. I'm not going, but also some distrust. I mean, the word trust was mentioned also in the previous speech. And so we have to move to new solutions. We have to reestablish trust, because the whole digital transformation, one of the key components is trust. Can I share my medical files between an Italian and a Luxembourg? You know, it's not just privacy, but yes, of course, it's privacy too, but there are many other things. It's a trust-based issue. We don't share geodata because we don't trust the others, you know. There's not much privacy in geodata, I think. Not too much, I suppose. And so we will have new problems. And so, fourth issue is academic disciplines matter. How many of you are science and technology? High. Down. Who is humanities? Are you? Don't be ashamed. High. Where are the humanities? Okay, down. Medical? None. We have a problem. No. Houston, we have a problem. No, it's fine. I think it's interesting to see science and technology. I put technology on top here. Are you sure you're part of the solution? Normally when I have these speeches, I'm on the other side because that's closer to the emergency exit. So academic disciplines matter. And it's not just, of course, the quality of engineers and what have statisticians or what have you. It's about the sequence of the academic disciplines we need to ensure digital transformation. If the problem only were technology, that would be easy. Given that it's difficult, it would be easy. And so the question is legal frames, the finances, organization, the service delivery, and of course, the technology. People say we are the first domino, and we push the others, and then everything follows. Absolutely not. The obvious is not obvious. And so what we need is not a sequence, because normally it's, you know, you have an invention, an innovation, you want to implement it, you have some experiments, people say, oh, that's very nice, that's impressive, you know, the imitation, let's have that too, you know, but it's not like a washing machine that you put in your house, it's a bit more complex, right? And so, and then, we have legislation, then the lawyers come in and they say, oh, that's very impressive, you know, but we don't have the legal frames, and then suddenly the economists, you know, the budget people come in, who is going to pay for this here? And then the people come from the organization, oh, we have to reorganize. Oh dear, that's a tough one. Oh, we have to distribute the competences. Oh, are you sure about that? You know, and then we have the service delivery, the people who have to do it, they say, when do I take my retirement? And so you have a cascade of issues, and so it's about also the solutions creating problems here, and what we need is actually a simultaneous logic to say we have to have mixed teams. You know, and in the Second World War, I don't know if you ever heard of Bouckaert's circuit, Lord Bouckaert. He got the Nobel Prize. He really brought in operational research. By the way, I have partly an engineering background too, so I'm also guilty. Yes, I plead guilty. But the Bouckaert circus was to bring together a whole mix of people with different qualifications in a task force. It was, of course, in the circumstance of the Second World War, and to beat the enemy, you know, and have it at a high level of analysis here. We have to simultaneously think with iterations, and that's a tough one to say, you know, law, lines, organization, finances, we have to do it simultaneously, not sequentially. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, the fifth issue why the obvious is not obvious is that we have to have a Copernican change in the way we conceive the functioning of our systems. To put it a bit black and white, it's blue and red here, but it's to say we have currently a situation where we have organizations that have databases that may or may not be connected. That's what we have now. And so we try to make agreements for these organizations to connect them with others that are useful to connect, to allow their databases to be connected. I think that's what we are trying to do, to have a kind of whatever chain you want to set up, blocked or unblocked chains, you know, or the kinds of algorithms, you know. We are moving, actually. I think we are moving, and that's a Copernican change, and we have to organize this actively, and that's not an easy thing to do. We are moving from organizations with databases that may or may not be connected to connected databases with organizations. And that's a totally different concept of governance. So it's not the organizations that are in the center with the databases in the second circle connected or not connected. It's actually the core of the future of our societies will be connected databases with organizations. And they will use the data that are connected. And that's a totally different mind map. It's a different paradigm to organize and part of these organizations are public, part are private, part are citizens directly, and that's what we have to do. So I give an example of cadastre. I could give an example also of license numbers of cars. You know, it used to be a kind of separate database, you know, cadastre, because it's linked to tax. Cadastre, in Belgium, cadastres are part of the Ministry of Finance. But license numbers too, it's just to pay taxes, you have your car. But now, suddenly these databases become part of a lot of policy fields. Ecology, mobility, follow-up on security, and so suddenly an isolated database, which actually running this database, in some countries it was privatized, because it was just isolated, you know, we could privatize it. We could earn some money from that and pay debt, at least in Belgium. So it's but now we see that these peripheral databases become in the center of many policy fields, and they need to be connected. So to privatize that would be cruel. We have to make them a core. They are the spinal cord of our public sphere, which is organizing part of the state, which then organizes our societies. You see, I'm very old-fashioned. Sixth is visions of the future. And because I want to support our link with the European Commission, the DG Connect, and I'm sure you know the report, and I invite you to download it. The 4 scenarios of possible futures is there, and I think it's, you know, do-it-yourself democracy, the private algocracy, the super collaborative government, the over-regulatory systems. I'm not going to the details of all these 4 models. You just have to go to the report, which is excellent. And there are different ways to look at this here. There are other scenarios. So the question is, how do we organize systems that have the flexibility to anticipate possible futures? That sounds like a very complex question, but actually it's a very relevant question to say, we still don't know where the bifurcations are. Are we going in this direction or in this direction? The bifurcations are very important in path dependencies, you know, and to see, are we taking a turn in this side or in this side here? I think I will just add 2 elements here to these futures, possible futures. It's about the legal frames. The legal frames are essential, I think. And how many lawyers are here? One lawyer? Congratulations, welcome. You know, I don't belong to the group of people like Shakespeare. Shakespeare said, let's kill all the lawyers, but I think that's a bit of an exaggeration. I think we need lawyers. We need good lawyers. I think it's important to say, are we moving from public law, because, you know, this European continental tradition, to private law? What we see is a massive import of private law in the public sphere. That's something. And the second thing is, more national law or more international law? And of course, the international law in this field is a bit, you know, of course, I don't consider European legislation as international law, but it's actually a national law, but it has an international flavor. And of course, in the debates with the US, you know, the different concepts where privacy for Europeans is a public good, whereas privacy in the US is a private good. You know, we have huge differences. I'm sorry, I'm getting enthusiastic here. It's so I have to cut it down. Otherwise, you know. Conclusions. We had the scenery set by Verdi. We have had the drama. 6 reasons why the obvious is not obvious. And now we have the finale. The finale is actually to say, don't be depressed. And you will walk out of this room singing, waving with the flag of interoperability, because it is possible to move to the Rose Garden. And the Rose Garden will be closer if we think of these 6 elements. Provide right answers to right questions, so trigger a demand-driven supply. Control costs, push benefits, and consider costs as investments. Think ahead, anticipate problems triggered by solutions. Handle different professional disciplines interactively and simultaneously. Start thinking in terms of databases with organizations. Prepare for possible futures of government and have scenarios there. Thank you very much.